All right, well, we'll get started with the first of our two presentations for this particular session. This session is kind of a little bit different from the other sessions because it's occurring over the lunch break period. And I know it's called a brown bag, but since we're in Farber Hall, even though there are a ton of snacks, evidence that snacks happen in here, technically we're not supposed to be eating in here. So if you want to have your lunch, feel free to hop out, have your lunch, and then come right back and we'll kind of enjoy this a little bit more laid back lunchtime session. We're going to start hearing about impacts of peer pressure on students.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Jane.
And we are presenting the impacts of peer pressure on students.
So there's a harsh reality of peer pressure that almost everyone will experience both good and bad peer pressure. So what is peer pressure? Peer pressure is a feeling that one must do the same thing as other people of one's age and social group in order to be liked or respected by them. Peer pressure can come from all surrounding influences, including family, friends, social media, and many other things. The kind of individuals you surround yourself with matter just as much as the act of having the interactions with other students, since they do have a significant impact on your growth and mental health. If you're surrounding yourself with good people, you will generally make better decisions and vice versa.
So approximately 90% of teens reported having experienced peer pressure, and only 10% say they have never experienced peer pressure. Peer pressure occurs regularly, including online, among friends, at school, and occasionally even in our own homes. 28% of kids say that giving into peer pressure helps them move up the social ladder. So kids typically worry about their social standings. They believe that if they do what others want them to do, they will be more likable and get more popular amongst their peers. 38% of people admit to pressuring their friends into doing something they're not comfortable with. In addition, 38% of teens claim that they were coerced into making a decision that was detrimental to their health. 34% of people claim that they were coerced into doing something against the law, and 41% of people said they would make different decisions if they weren't under pressure to do so. So throughout the research we have gathered, we believe that peer pressure has more of a negative effect on children than a positive because of the severity of the effects negative peer pressure has on students. So positive peer pressure is more prevalent than negative peer pressure. However, according to the American Psychological Association, young adults are more affected by negative peer pressure since these impacts are more long-lasting. This is due to the fact that the majority of negative consequences are more addicting than the positive ones.
So some positive effects that peer pressure can have on children is excelling academically, developing leadership qualities, participating in extracurricular activities that maybe you wouldn't have thought of, volunteering places, and overall being able to foster a sense of belonging, self-confidence, and just being able to make those good decisions.
So some of the negative effects are things such as skipping class, stealing, cheating, bullying, using drugs and alcohol, a decrease in self-confidence, poor academic performance, distancing from family members and friends, increase in depression and anxiety, self-harm, and an increase in suicidal thoughts. And because of the lasting effects, we believe that peer pressure is more negative than positive for school children.
Very nicely done. After a couple minutes of intermission, because we need to grab the second presentation, we'll have our second presentation up. So just relax and hang out for a second. All right, sorry for the short delay. We'll continue with our second presentation.
So I'm Will, and this is Jose, and our presentation is about corruption within business ownership based on the Industrial Revolution.
So the concept of a game, there are 4 players that can participate in the game. Each player is a snobby business owner that competes in expanding oil refineries. This game is based on the concept of monopoly, but with a twist. So each player is looking to build up their own refinery while competing with others. Players can have like shady business opportunities to set back others, but at a cost. This plays into the role of having sabotage spaces into the board. And the player can choose whether to sabotage them or not when landing on the space.
So we have player backgrounds for each one. There's just simple names to tell the difference between each player. So with that, we'll be correlating die pieces with that. So each of the 4 players participating will have their own die that represents which company they are. And then these are just the names we came up with, just random names to use that I thought would be funny. So my personal favorite would be Charles Gentle Sir would be the one I would use for the game. So we have a rule system, and there are several types of spaces that will have different implications on what happens to each player. Blue spaces represent that your refinery is advancing either with business opportunities, new inventions, or gainful employment. This way players have a way to make money. Red spaces represent corruption. Players will lose money by poor business decisions the owner makes. This hurts the player financially whenever landing on these spaces. Yellow spaces represent sabotaging other players. This takes out a fee out of your own pocket while financially hurting others. The player will roll a dice determining their rewards and consequences for each space. Dice are put into 3 separate categories depending on severity or generosity of each space does not affect choices for sabotage. spaces.
So game contents, each player will start off the game with 10,000. You'll use a sheet of paper to keep track of your funds. Our own created board will have several key gameplay elements while participating. Each space on the board has the player either gain or lose a certain amount when you land on it. So the positive kickbacks in the company will receive money to keep playing. There's 14 positive spaces in total. 7 spaces will have the player gain 500. 4 spaces will be gaining 1,000, and 3 spaces will be gaining 2,500. Negative spaces show events where the CEO makes improper decisions for the company, causing workers to get hurt or losing funding, or even maybe worse. There's 10 negative spaces in total. 6 spaces lose 500, 3 spaces lose 1,000, and one space has a player lose 5,000. And there are a total of 4 sabotage spaces on the board, and they're each on the corner of the board. Players can choose whether to sabotage other players or not when landing on the space, and each decision can either be a yes or no when doing so. 3 spaces will have the players choose to pay 500 for any player to lose 1,000, and 1 space on the board will have the player choose to pay 2,500 to remove 5,000.
So the financial status and end goal of this game, each player will start out with a selected amount of cash, and their decisions will impact how they do for the rest of it. If a player goes under financially, if they just go under $0, they are permanently out for the rest of the game. So it's like a battle royale kind of style. And the goal for each player is to gain the best financial stability for each of their companies while attempting to knock off their competitors. The cards drawn for the green and red spaces will show issues and progressiveness between the company owners and blue-collar workers, while the sabotage spaces will show the corruption between the company owners and what they will do to stay at the top. The game will end with either the top player having the most cash wins, or the last player standing can win the game too. Each goal, or the end goal, is to reach a net worth of $25,000. That's if you still have your competition within the game. If there are no players left to compete with 1 player left on the board, then hence they win. So
the sociological elements, we went with a social class. So underpaid workers. Back then, workers were severely underpaid as there was a surplus of labor. Many of these employers would simply fire you and replace you in a heartbeat if you did not like the wage. On average, these employees would get paid 10 to 20 cents an hour, which would not support a family, leading to women having to work in these terrible conditions, as well as children. And poor working environments. Underdeveloped/limited technology made the workplace extremely dangerous. Facilities were extremely dirty. Temperatures inside workshops could reach up to 100 degrees. Workers were also tasked to work at least 10 to 12 hours a day. And accidents were not uncommon in the workplace. So how is this relevant today? As the economy gets worse and everything gets more expensive, people are having a harder time affording anything, affording housing, affording groceries, affording a way to live. So, we chose a problem that's relevant in today's society, as the middle class of America has trouble finding how to live and how to survive in this harsh environment.
So we just went for the more simple standard when it came to marketing this game, starting with social media. I'd be more catered towards an adult audience because, what kid would care about politics? The only thing they would care about is just getting their other friends to screw them over. Did you have a question?
No,
Fair enough. So another place I wanted to advertise it was Facebook Marketplace. I know people that scroll on that app all the time, just within family or friends whenever I'm out and about, and they look for the most random things on there. So what would be more random than a kind of game like this? There's also online auctions, I believe would be a good idea as well. That way there isn't a set price on the board game that we have. So we can either gain more money or get less of it, whereas it'll go to somebody who might not be as financially well off as somebody else. So I think auctions would be a good idea to have that, since that's one of our main messages of the game, is to help people that don't have enough funding. Last thing I wanted to do was live streaming charity events. Streaming online is a lot more relevant now more than ever. And with that, you can implement charity style lineups online to where you can have people who will send you money for these sort of games. And then One example could be like, if you raise a certain amount for a charity, you can give away 5 of these games to players. So I feel like that would be a good idea as well. As far as retail stores go, we would just shoot for the mega corporations like Walmart and Target. Very easily like accessible throughout the country. You have a lot of different options within those stores. So it wouldn't exactly stick out compared to other items you would sell. And then we were also looking at adult catered stores. So like one store in particular that I've been to is Spencer's before. And it's more of like I guess you could say like raunchy style adult catered for the humor part of it. So I think that would be a good idea as well to implement it because of the adult audiences that go in there. So I think that would be interesting as well. And plus, I mean, it's Spencer's. They have all sorts of wacky crap in there. Who would not want to go and do a Spencer's visit? Oops, I think I went too far back. That was it.
So in conclusion, 4 players are assigned the roles of CEOs and oil refiners during the industrial period, but the goal is to stay above water no matter the circumstance. The game only ends when the first player makes it to 25,000, or there's only 1 player left standing. Each space will have their own category for how much a player's business will either gain or lose, and will also be marked with references of what happens to the company to make the board stand out. The bias for corruption for businesses is to show how corrupt some owners are and how they treat workers as expandable rather than humans.
And then we got our sources for the next one. Yeah, I got you.
So, as a player,
You're the owner itself within the company. So while you land on those spaces, it'll describe what goes on, but you don't actually have any difference that's catered towards it. We just pick the owner because that's the central main focus of what our game is about. As far as who makes those decisions anyway. It was mostly about like just how our market is today online. And I know that the Industrial Revolution was a lot easier to like go about, especially with doing research on how workers were treated back then, especially since it was a lot worse to compare it as now. It's still relevant today, but I feel like adding the Industrial Revolution theme of it into the game gives it more of like an identity to what we're trying to talk about instead of just talking about the marketplace as a whole. So like even like with the jokes with the owners' names and other things relating to that, it just gives more, like I said, an identity to what we're trying to get through. So.
So given that you said during the Industrial Revolution, where we really started to paper, right?
Mhm.
I don't know anything about. Kind of through the right business.
So with that, we were debating on it for quite a while for how our game was going to be structured. We thought about doing different categories of cards, rolling for different categories of dice and other things like that. But we were worried about it being overcomplicated on the board game itself. So after that happened, we decided to have detailed descriptions for each space that you would land on. And well, there's 3 different types of spaces. So like good, positive, negative, and then sabotage. But each one has their own category for where you will land on, and they're all spaced out evenly on the board. So that way one person doesn't have an advantage over the other. So with the detailed descriptions given of it, it's on the board itself. So that way it'll help give more of the immersive feeling to when you're playing the game. My favorite part of it is the sabotage spaces because that's where you're able to, it's a game mechanic basically. So where you can choose whether to take out your own competition or not, but you lose money on your own while hurting these other people. And you could also create enemies for later on as well. And you can base it on teamwork if you choose to. That's the beauty of this game, that it's free in your own right. You can either team up with another player, you can go about your own. All three of you can target someone if you want. So there's a lot of different things when it comes to that. While the board is simple, we wanted it to be descriptive with the rest of the elements that come with it.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to seeing it. That being said,
Yeah, it was more of a broader sense when we were looking at that. Right.
Do you think about trying to go to that on your games? Hey, Spencer, do you like how you make Spencer? Kind of very specific. This is an academic event, I'm not used to things of a certain je ne sais quoi to them on the board.
That's just simply one thing we didn't consider while going over our marketing strategy. I just wanted to make sure that it was put at least in the right kind of stores where everybody could have access to it. I understand where you're coming from with the foundation of it, so that would be a very good idea to implement later on. Because in order to gain traction for our game, we should have to advertise it freely at first to even gain the attention of others before they're willing to spend money on to buy it. And especially with how everything's going more technological and online nowadays, people are less likely to buy a physical board game on its own. So, and I know we didn't put it in our presentation, but another aspect I considered was like, let's say this game got success. You could later release an online version of it for people to play against each other. So that way you're not limited to the physical space of it, and you can play with anybody who suffers from economic issues, you know, because each country is built differently on their own, of course, when it comes to that too. So.
So I was getting both of you there. I was thinking it's sort of like, because you did say it would be and so it matters. Like that one. So I do. Did you ever consider like making it business owners at all?
That's why we have the positive spaces. I know we highlighted more of the bad side of it, but that's because we needed to deliver a main message to it, especially with what's going on today. But with the positive spaces, we just talk about random things like, 10 workers recently went on a mining expedition and you gained all these resources. So that's how you would collect your money to gain more revenue. So while you land on those positive spaces, it's all aspects of what your workers find, but it's not necessarily benefiting the workers themselves, I guess, in a way. So it always goes back to the CEO and owner, and that's why you play as the owner in the first place.
I think that's where I was received as artists. I was looking for practical representation of function is that.
Mm. Right. Because technically you as the owner are very aware of all the terrible things you're doing. You just don't care.
Yeah, so like the game board itself, it'll tell you like that you did this and that you earned money, but like the workers,
Did all the work.
yeah, and they didn't receive anything. They just received like crappy payment or whatever it is.
Right. Alan? What do you think?
I think it'd be harder to cater towards kids when talking about because the whole point of the game is like talking about society and how people get paid really bad. So like
Corruption within businesses, yeah.
so like kids don't really earn anything or like they don't really care about that. Well, they do, but
And I'm trying to think of like ways you could implement it for children. So like, I guess certain things could be like toys or movies you could cater to as well. That's a I've heard of that show, yeah.
Go for garage.
That is a good point. While I think you could try to teach kids corruption for this game, there are the kids that will use it as a tool to benefit themselves. So there is that to consider as well. So that's why we wanted it to have such a adult related topic, because obviously as you get older, it's easier for someone to tell right from wrong in that way. So.
Did you ever consider making any of the characters something like I can definitely see one for like what we're finding these. But did you since it is marketed to adults?
Yep.
Did you ever consider like expanding and doing like this is the best?
It's funny you mentioned that, because for our first draft of our game, our old title was actually Environmental Fusion, which really doesn't make sense looking back. But we were just looking more of like a broader business sense then, and we needed to gain more knowledge on what actually goes on within these businesses. So since we were trying to figure out what to write or implement for that, we chose one specific company on its own. So that way we were able to keep up with the theme of the board game for like the incidents that happen at this company or the positives that happen at this company. Because like, let's say if there's 4 different business owners, they're not exactly in the same running for competition as one another. So why would you go out of your way to screw someone else over, you know? And because of that, I'm trying to think where I was going with that now. So we just kept it simple, basically to keep a theme as well. That way the incidents can be similar to one another, and gaining revenue can also be similar. So, Alan? Not necessarily, no. It's very professional, like I would say. Jose did a great job at being able to give descriptive details on the board game within itself. And then I just wanted to address the main points in the presentation. So I think it'll be more of like
a
Biz-
funny satirical, like,
it's very satirical, yeah. Like I think one of the cards or one of the like boards were something like, oh, you had 10 workers die in a mining accident. The owner sends his condolences to their family, and then that's it. Just something random like that,
yeah,
you know.
just very funny, very like,
Like just to the point, like brash, or like it really doesn't matter that this happened because everyone's expendable in a way.
Right.
So yeah, that's what we were shooting for.
I think we kind of just seen through this, but is there any real, you ever have like, who's going to pay you this, or is there
It's not super complex when it comes to that. We wanted to keep it simple so that way the game doesn't get out of hand and the players can keep a fairness to it. So that's why we did the 3 separate categories. Like you land on one space, then since that it costs so much specifically, so you lose $500. But if you land on a more severe space, like let's say you have an oil spill compared to a few workers getting hurt, then obviously you would have to pay out more. With the sabotage spaces, that like for that one, you have to, I think it's like pay 500 to have another player lose 1,000. So it's hurting yourself to use your own resources to hurt someone else. But that way it shows the true corruptiveness of it. I wanted to be more descriptive when it came to certain things like that, but it would just make the game more complicated entirely. And it would have taken Jose and I forever to try to figure out all the kinks to it. So. Sounds good. Thank you.
Oh.
Just in case you need that.
What are our on peer pressure? And I exert adequate peer pressure. When you guys were going over we're allowed to do that. You answer that.
I think it could be either. It depends on like the situation. And like who you're surrounding yourself with.
I think it was that aspect was more of because of the bad decisions you have gotten yourself into, and where you like could be at your life, that is what you could resort to as a coping mechanism. So, but there are people who do peer pressure people into like self-harm and stuff, but
so we saw that a lot of people would like do better in school. They were peer pressured into joining more clubs or taking more of a leadership role in some of the things that they were doing. So we saw them excel academically.
yeah, I think just being pushed out of your comfort zone to do certain things that, you know, maybe you wouldn't have thought of doing before, that could be effective positive peer pressure.
So the presentation of most students
While doing research, we saw a lot of like teach kids what's going on, but like you said, like there's not really much you can do about it when they're in that situation. But I think just giving them like a broad explanation of what could possibly happen if they were to engage in some of those negative peer pressure.
I think parents can have a big effect on that too, because parents can partake in pressure, like peer pressure. You know, if your child doesn't want to do something and basically like forcing them to do it by like, oh, I'm going to be disappointed in you or stuff like that. And then children learn a lot from their parents. So if as a parent, you can realize and recognize like certain things or certain ways to go about different things, that can have an effect on whether or not your child will partake in also being peer pressure to other people.
So you're looking at the negative effect. Streaming or big one is drugs. That would be here. There are other peer pressure. These times with either issues dated that concerns regarding attorney life issues regarding sexual assault and such as being peer pressured into scoring and phosphorus and the like. What within the strategy finding aside from data, right, to address some of these peer pressure and if you also happen to see, do they happen to be better or not?
We didn't really find much, like, we didn't really look into that as much, but I think that like, I don't know.
What was your question again?
Or I guess the trending injuries, right? They're all these
Right.
or potentially like problematic behavior, even down to young women in junior high, doing pressure to lose their virginity,
Right.
And there are all these different campaigns and strategies and parents and organizations who pull out to try to reduce the likelihood that kids and professional individuals engage in problematic behavior. What types of programs, if any, you have noticed that were developed to try to deal with this type of peer pressure, and additionally, were they effective at all? And again, this doesn't even have to be out of your personal research. You can just speak to experience and your own experience.
So I personally have seen around this campus and like other places that I've attended for school, there's been a lot of like posters you can see about awareness to certain things regarding like sexual assault or underage drinking or hazing. But I personally don't think that those posters are helping or doing anything, because you can read something and be like, oh, okay, but then it's not going to matter, when your friends are like, oh, just come out and have a drink with us. It's not going to, it's not going to be bad. It's going to be a fun time. And, those posters or those things you talked about in class are not going to matter anymore as much as your friends' opinions on you. Do you have anything?
All right, so Can you tell us a bit more about the positive forms of peer pressure? And is there a point at which positive forms of peer pressure have a negative effect?
So I have a personal example. In high school, I was not very involved in anything my freshman year. And then this one standing next to me encouraged me to become a cheerleader. And by my senior year, we were captains together, and we had brought the cheer program up a bit at our high school as well. I think that majority of it was positive, but a big negative thing that could happen is like burnout. It was a lot all at once, like with cheerleading and school and everything else that I had going on. So I think that it could have negative effects as well, but the majority of it is positive.
I would say for like academically, that is a positive thing of like you're excelling and you're doing well in school, but you can also have like tons of amount of stress that you're put under, and not being able to sleep enough at night because you're trying to race to get all your stuff done and done efficiently. So that can lead to like anxieties and depression with just trying to meet the standards that you are trying to meet.
Get a round of applause for all the presenters. All right, we are going to have an intermission until about 1 o'clock. So relax, enjoy your lunch, and we'll circle back at around 1 o'clock.